So welcome to session 2 of the 2023 Nova Conference on the Seeds of Change. I'm Susan Prescott, Director of the Nova Network and Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this conference. This session is on a matter of justice. And to start the session, we want to play part 2 of that beautiful Thrive artwork that we all enjoyed this morning. And thank you again to Sarah Warber and her wonderful community of creatives for this work. So we'll go to that now. Thank you. Well, thank you again, Sarah, and the group at Mutual Reawakening. That's a really wonderful prelude as I call on Rick Scott to guide us through a mindful moment for this session. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Susan. So let's begin by taking a few relaxing breaths to center into this space. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. Let your breathing be natural and relaxed. No need to change your breathing in any way. Now imagine a place in nature that is meaningful for you. Any place that comes to mind is perfect. Notice the color of the sky, of the land, of the trees. Perhaps you can feel the warmth of sunlight or a gentle breeze. Listen for any sounds around you. Song of birds, the movement of water, or the wind through the trees. Feel the aliveness of nature all around you and with all of your senses as we sit in silence for just a few moments. When you are ready, return your attention to this space. Gently open your eyes, feeling relaxed and refreshed.
Well, thank you as always, Rick. So just more about how this session will run. All of our sessions are a series of short talks by panelists, generally for around 5 minutes each, with the exception of our first keynote talk, followed by open discussion with everyone. And because this panel is so large, we aim to have an interim discussion about halfway, time permitting. So I'm going to kick off now with my 5-minute introduction to frame the topic. Thank you very much. Our remarkable and unique world provides a perfect environment for life, and it's inspiring to expand our awareness to how all biological life began, with simple unicellular organisms like those still seen in the stromatolites of Western Australia. To remember the exuberant and miraculous processes by which all life co-evolved in symbiotic mutualism, leading to the incredible diversity and ecological richness of the countless intricate and dynamic complex systems we see in nature today, all from the same source, an incredible story of creativity and cosmic cooperation. Nature's demonstration that symbiotic relationships are key to both individual survival and collective resilience. These cooperative relationships have facilitated adaptations to thrive in diverse niches and sometimes harsh conditions. Nature shows us that diversity is a measure of health, and we're learning to apply the same principles to other situations, ranging from the health of our own personal intestinal ecosystems to the health and diversity of our societies. We're starting to see, or perhaps remember, that systems are whole entities where the parts are interdependent and the whole is only as strong as its weakest parts. Nature is justice in action, expressed in the balance, in the exchange of energy, in the mutualism, in the diversity, in the equal value, where small is just as vital as large, and all are equally evolved. As we dive into the beautiful, ugly, complicated messiness of humanity, it's good to hold the inherent justice of nature as our yardstick. This invites us to think about social justice in these simple terms of balance and fairness and living in what is described as right relationship with others and with nature, of loving our neighbours and doing good for those around us, with the understanding that the whole community thrives when all of its members thrive and none is left behind. It is a mindset of abundance and love where we experience gain through generosity rather than fearing loss. We seem far from this situation in the world today: war, discrimination, exploitation, deception, manipulation, and all kinds of inequalities. We can easily be consumed by the vortex of these injustices, and there are many. We can also see they are symptoms of something deeper and look into the common cause, which is broken relationships, falling out of loving relationships with ourselves, with each other, and the natural world, forgetting that we are part of the same wholeness. This creates a dominant mindset of scarcity, fear, driving greed, isolationism, territorialism, prejudice, which underpin most of our challenges and injustices. We fear our differences rather than embrace the richness that they bring to our common humanity. We fall deeper into blame, hatred, and vengeance, which only serve to drive resistance and deepen divisions. It's becoming so critical to break that cycle, and there is great hope in the many people working across sectors to do this, working to shift our consciousness towards more unity of awareness. Indigenous knowledges remind us of the deep natural justice inherent to the shared collective self. To harm the earth, to harm another, is to harm the self. Or, put another way, to heal the earth, to heal communities, is to heal the self, the shared sense of self. These are the deeper foundations that we want to lay for our discussion today. Yes, the mindsets and narratives that have given rise to so many of our devastating problems are entrenched and difficult to change. But it is not enough to just reject these old stories. We need viable, appealing, new stories for tangible choices. This might seem obvious, but we still see so many people focus more on destroying the old than building the new. This underscores the importance of new narratives that recognise the problem but focus resources on solutions, both specific to the situations, but also feeding the deeper shift in core value systems that we ultimately need. And today we will hear from people doing just that. Again, in this we do not aim to discuss all the challenges to justice in the world today, but to hear from people working to change the story in a number of specific areas, ranging from criminal justice, food justice, social and environmental justice. It's also why we have professional storytellers here today, and why Nova is investing in solutions journalism and a new media fellowship program. We're also encouraging an overarching planetary health perspective that reinforces the connections between human flourishing and the health of our environments, and the importance of societal systems and values that promote mutual resilience. But again, this too is how nature works. In the face of challenge, she adapts, she regenerates, and she works collaboratively as a whole of many parts to establish new equilibrium under new conditions, and we are ultimately not separate from that. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mirian Vilela, Executive Director of the Earth Charter. And there could not be a better example of creating a new story for a more ethical, caring, respectful and responsible civilization on our planet than the Earth Charter. Mirian is an acclaimed international leader in global sustainable development, and I don't want to detract from her time by reading her bio, but I invite you to look at our event webpage to see all the profiles of our panelists. So thank you, and over to you now, Mirian.
Thank you, Susan, and hello from Costa Rica. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share with you something about the Earth Charter, its origin, some of the core ideas we can find in it, and how we are working with it. Of course, I'm doing this with the intention to invite you, all those participating in this session, to consider using it in your sphere of work and action, as I think it can serve you in the work you are doing, wherever you are. Let me start by saying that I see the Earth Charter as a seed of change, as a seed to inspire, to help us envision a different world, a seed to be planted in our minds and hearts, in the minds and hearts of people from all over, but also a seed to be planted at the center of the institutions and their decisions. But as we know how it works in the world of seeds, depending on which ground it falls and how much water and sun it gets, that seed can flourish immensely or not. Let me share a few thoughts on its purpose. I think much of the purpose of the Earth Charter is to serve as an instrument to help us to navigate through some difficult decisions, the difficult decisions that we have before us. It also has the purpose of deepening and expanding our consciousness with regards to how we ought to relate to one another in the large community of life that we are part. Formally speaking, the Earth Charter has the purpose to offer an ethical foundation or a framework for a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. It articulates human shared values and principles that can guide humanity in that direction. In other words, it makes visible what sometimes it's maybe invisible in terms of values and principles. Personally, for over 25 years, I have seen how the Earth Charter has the potential to spark a sense of belonging to the Earth community. Our understanding also, and our deep sense of connection and interdependence among ourselves, other living beings, and the large living world. This idea is clearly stated in the Earth Charter Principle 16F, which invites us to seek the right relationships with oneself, other persons, other cultures, other life, Earth, and the large whole of which we are all part. The Earth Charter can also be seen as a compass, a compass to help us move towards the direction of a new civilization, towards the direction of a more ecological and kind civilization. Let me share with you where it comes from, where the idea of the Earth Charter comes from. The idea of the Earth Charter emerged prior to the Earth Summit, the Rio 92 Earth Summit, and it was part of the preparatory process of this major United Nations conference. The vision from the beginning, from the outset, was to develop a new charter to guide states and various actors towards sustainability. Similar as we know the Human Rights Declaration, which guides states and various actors regarding what human rights means or should be. And in the case of the Earth Charter, it was envisioned that this charter should focus more on human responsibilities and also in our sense of interdependence. But at that time, in 92, there was no political agreement or political will within the intergovernmental sphere. Therefore, the idea of an Earth Charter was taken to the sphere of civil society, and it was really clear that the process of drafting the Earth Charter should be as participatory and inclusive and as broad as possible. So the Earth Charter is the result of a multicultural and multi-sectoral dialogue and consultation process that took place during the decade of the 90s. It was launched in the year 2000, and since then it became a global movement that really involves individuals and organizations from different parts of the world and who have simply embraced their charter and are using it in many different ways. For example, UNESCO, as some of you know, adopted 2 resolutions recognizing the importance of the Earth Charter as an ethical framework for sustainable development. One of these resolutions, or the first one, was in 2003, 20 years ago, and the other one in 2019. These resolutions basically encourage member states and partners to use their charter as an educational instrument. Now, let me give you some highlights on its content, the content that you can find in their charter. Their charter is centered on an ethic of care and respect for the community of life. So think about what it means, what comes to your mind when you hear the idea of community of life. And when you envision caring for the community of life, how can you envision that? The Earth Charter text starts with a preamble that invites us to celebrate our diversity, the diversity of cultures and life forms. At the same time, it invites us to celebrate our common humanity. It stresses, for instance, that we are one human family and one Earth community. The preamble is followed by 16 main principles and many supporting principles organized in 4 parts. The first one is respect and care for the community of life. The second organizes the ideas around ecological integrity. The third one organizes principles around the notion of social and economic justice. And the last and fourth part organizes principles and values, ideas around the notion of democracy, nonviolence, and peace. The Earth Charter underlines ideas, concepts, or principles that are sometimes not seen or somehow are not often in our conscious, such as this idea of community of life, that we belong, we are part of a community of life, or ideas such as the importance to recognize that all beings are interdependent and every form of life has values regardless of its worth to human beings. So this notion of utilitarianism. To close, I just want to emphasize that the Earth Charter and the work we do at our education center that is located here in Costa Rica. It's organized around under the framework of the UNESCO Chair on Education for Sustainable Development with the Earth Charter, which we established in 2012 together with UNESCO and the University for Peace. And the work we do really seeks to nurture the opposite of the predominant narrative or worldviews that are based on the values of competition, materialism, short-sightedness, or the view or the worldview that is based on a fragmented thinking, or even the narrative or worldview around individualism and self-centered, self-interest or indifference. But rather, the Earth Charter emphasizes, nurtures, cultivates a narrative or worldview that is really life-centric, systemic, that is focused on the common good, helps us to seek the common good in our decisions, and that it helps us to think about the consequences of the actions and decisions we make every day. It also cultivates and nurtures a narrative or worldview that involves our capacity to feel a deep sense of connection, responsibility, and care for the well-being of all life on Earth. So thank you. I hope you can deepen and reflect on the use of the Earth Charter as an instrument to help you navigate, or as an instrument such as an ethical compass that can help you in your decisions, but also as an ethical reference and as an educational instrument that can help you clarify or examine the values and the consequences of the decisions all of us make every day, and also our institutions. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Mirian. And thank you for emphasizing the importance of relationship, of new narratives, of not only seeding hearts and minds with these, but providing the conditions for flourishing, which ultimately are love and our common humanity. It's really a perfect foundation for the many issues that we're going to discuss in this session. And with that in mind, it is my pleasure to invite Zinzi Bailey, a member of the NOVA invited faculty from the University of Minnesota, who will talk about the importance of focusing on our common humanity in overcoming our structural health injustices. Thank you, Zinzi.
Thank you so much, Susan. And it's actually really promising that a lot of the themes that you've already gone into are going to come out in this very brief talk. So I want to thank you first for inviting me to speak briefly today about justice. And as Susan said, I'm Zinzi Bailey, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Community Health at the University of Minnesota. And my work really focuses on the health impacts of and policy solutions for structural and institutional racism, especially at the intersection of the criminal legal system and housing. And in my work, both the research component and the substantive creation work, the consistent goal that is persistent is health equity, right? And a lot of times it's used as a buzzword, but I think it really means something, right? So health equity is really achieved when every person has the opportunity to attain his, her, their full health potential, and no one's disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. And while this is the goal, what we end up researching and studying, often in epidemiology in particular, is health disparities or inequities. And these are reflected in differences in length of life, quality of life, rates of disease, disability, and death, severity of disease, and access to treatment. But this does not mean that health equity is simply its inverse. So as I move forward in the work that I do and what I hope to develop in terms of narrative and in concrete examples is thinking about what health equity really looks like. And from a very broad perspective, health equity looks like equality in outcomes, not only equality in outcomes, but also equity in the process. And so a lot of times from a public health perspective, there's this idea of intervention and thinking about what we are going to do to address health inequities. As we're moving towards health equity and addressing these health inequities, these interventions can be conceptualized as occurring upstream, downstream, or somewhere in between. And downstream determinants occur on individual levels, including individual biology, specific risk factors, and behaviors. And intervening on that level will help individuals, perhaps in a clinical context, perhaps in some other context, but it doesn't necessarily address factors upstream that drive patterns, read inequities in health behaviors, outcomes, and even biology. So going further upstream, we can find living conditions, which include physical, residential conditions, social environments, work environments, service environments. And we can characterize those in different ways. And so, for example, we can observe inequities in childhood asthma rates from a very public health perspective, and think about that in terms of a child who lives in public housing that is under-resourced to address common pests. That child is more likely to encounter asthma triggers and experience asthma attacks and require emergency department care or hospitalization. And often we call these conditions kind of the social determinants of health. And we can intervene on remediating one apartment or home, or increasing access to insurance to make care more accessible. But this is not really getting at systematic reasons by which public housing translates to poor built environment, and by which that family needs public housing in the first place. So the question that we are left with is, why are certain living conditions more prevalent among certain communities and not others? And what can we do about it? And often we see institutional inequities in the public and private sectors, as well as in public policy, that they're driving this distribution of social determinants of health. And in our example, we can think of resource allocation for public housing and the absence of the universal access to a living wage being key factors that might drive the living conditions within public housing. However, we have to go further upstream to social determinants of health inequities, the systems of social inequities like racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, ableism, so on and so forth, to see how access to resources and healthy living conditions are inequitably allocated across pre-existing hierarchies of power. But our goal is not just to study these kinds of pre-existing conditions of our systems, right? It's to sustainably drive towards health equity. So we have to think about ways to improve our communities further upstream, so that we're not continually just working on the downstream results of a larger inequitable system without thinking about the interrelationships between all of us, and thinking about how we move forward, or how these resources are allocated and the roots of the inequities in the first place. And so I can think about, from a solutions base, that we can talk about structural racism, which is where a lot of my work focuses. We proposed 3 key structural strategies for dismantling structural racism: multi-sector place-based initiatives and investments, disruptions to key leverage points, and transforming our organizations. And so we talked about what that might look like, but the underlying foundation is what we did not talk about, which is the narrative around what's needed, which is relationships. So we can talk about the money and the resources, but we're able to get that if we have the relationships. We're able to listen to what people are saying, and getting to that structural change is going to require cooperation, solidarity, community organizing, movement, in order to recognize our interconnectedness. And without that, structural change is impossible. So we have created structures and systems. They are our nature in a sense, but we have a role in that. And what provides a scaffolding for systemic change is the relationships between people and recognizing our shared humanity. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Zinzi. I really appreciate that. And this is such important work, and it's critical that we do look at the best of human nature as we move forward. And to continue the theme of social challenges, I'm delighted to invite Carlos Franco-Paredes from the University of Colorado, who's been working on the challenges in the context of international mass migration. So welcome, Carlos.
Thank you, Susan. So international mass migration is one of the major challenges of humanity in the 21st century, along with human accelerated climate change. And this social process that has been with humankind for millennia, what is different is the magnitude as well as the reasons for this migration. And just to give you an example of migrant population living in other countries for multiple reasons, by the year 2020, the population is about 281 million people living in a different place from their country of origin. Of these, important to show you that many are children, about 36 million of these 281. As you know, talking about the magnitude, but also talking about the reasons for international mass migration. The most important one being the economic downturn, people seeking opportunity, but also conflict, insecurity, violence, the impact of climate change, the impact of big powers like the U.S. foreign policies on, for example, economic sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba have been an important role, playing an important role in migration. Political oppression in countries like Venezuela, Haiti, and so on cannot be also not accounted for. I'm a clinician, and I think the reason to show you these is because I believe that physicians, healthcare workers, we should be agents of societal change. And as Zinzi was discussing, focusing on social justice, a critical component of social justice is health equity, housing equity, and so on. But it's important to go out there to the community and not just wait for people to become sick, because we send them back usually to the conditions that make them sick in the first place. In the setting of international mass migration, I think it's important to consider this structural vulnerability, structural violence that happens for reason for people to leave their home country and migrate during the process of migration and once they arrive to a new destination. It is my experience, as Susan explained, to work in the Darien Gap in the midst of the jungle. The reason for many people crossing this area is because it's a obligated pass from South America to Central America and then continue the journey up north, where people have to cross about 60 kilometers by foot. There's no roads. It's called the Gap because there's no roads. But the important thing to tell you about this experience is clearly a grotesque test that many people have to endure with profound consequences and leaving trauma and scars for people that are beyond their reasons why they left their original reasons for migrating. Some of these examples that we have collected, migrants experience food and water insecurity when crossing, trauma for extortion, crime, and violence, sexual violence. For example, this year, Doctors Without Borders has documented more than 250 sexual acts of violence, and many of these in children. So I think it's important to also talk about health disparities during this journey. People also die during the journey. There's the IOM, a Missing Migrant Project, has since 2014 collected or registered close to 60,000 deaths. Of those, more than half, the bodies have not been recovered. These are original pictures from the jungle in Panama of people that died and basically left abandoned for the elements that I wanted to show. And there's a study that we collected information, and the main reasons for people to die are basically medical, but then also violence, as well as drownings in the rivers. So what can we do in terms of solutions? I think thinking about the future, it's important to think about this in the home country to, reduce the mass migration issues. during migration issues and destination country. I think talking about during migration as the main target of this discussion, I believe that ensuring protection of people crossing these very vulnerable geographic areas is very important. There's not really international attention to this humanitarian crisis happening every day in this area. This year, about 500,000 people crossed compared to about 125,000 in 2021. So this is a very deadly route. Over in 2022 became the deadliest route in migration worldwide. And we cannot, since you mentioned the social improvements, promoting social justice, and looking at, again, foreign policy is important. This just to finalize these last few seconds, I wanted to show you this picture from one of the anthropologists I collaborate with. This is in one of the migrant stations once they cross the jungle. These are, the shoes of a family, the dad, the mom, and the two kids. And one important thing to show you here is the resilience of these families to travel all together. And on the left side, you can see a Bible drying also, just to show you that the people have religion, they're not just numbers. So to finalize, I believe, that to deal with this challenge in international mass migration, as Susan has emphasized, since I've had the pleasure of knowing her presentations in the Nova Institute, talking about kindness and compassion, I believe that's crucial here as healthcare workers. Anyone builds connectedness, purpose, and meaning. At least for me and for many people that I work with in trying to support these families. We need a new story. I think we need to rethink the world story, as Thomas Berry pointed out in his The Dream of the Earth. I think about this every time I see people suffering down in this journey. So thank you, Susan.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos, for this really, really important work. We need a lot more awareness of these issues, and as you say, more compassion, more kindness, and more actions for change. And your work is going to be even more important in what's going to be an ongoing challenge in the coming years. So we're now going to shift to law and criminal justice as other key indicators of the health of our societies. And I'm really delighted to introduce Osagie as one of our newly appointed Nova Scholars, Professor of Law at the University of California, Berkeley, who will talk about unwinding racial injustice in the justice system. Thank you, Osagie.
Great. Thank you, Susan. It's really great to be here. And first and foremost, many thanks to Susan and Brian for organizing this session. So my name is Osagie Obasogie, and I'm a law professor at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, with a joint appointment in the Joint Medical Program and School of Public Health. So I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you about some of my work on police use of force and excited delirium. So right now, there's a trial happening in Aurora, Colorado, concerning the death of Elijah McClain. So Elijah was a 20-year-old Black man who was walking down the street in 2019 and was confronted by 3 police officers. So they tackled him, they placed him in a chokehold, and used other restraints. At that point, paramedics were called to the scene, and it was determined that Elijah was suffering from a condition known as excited delirium, which is thought to be a psychiatric problem that can lead to aggression and anxiety and death if left untreated. So the paramedics gave Elijah an injection of a drug called ketamine, which has a strong sedative effect. Elijah went into cardiac arrest and died a few days later. Unfortunately, the use of ketamine in this manner is not uncommon. For example, evidence has shown that medics in Colorado have used ketamine to treat excited delirium over 902 times from 2017 to 2020. But excited delirium has also been used as an independent cause of death, or just to describe an to describe cause of death as an independent matter, especially when people die in police custody. So what happens is that police detain someone and they place them in physical restraints or use some other form of physical force. And when the person dies, the argument becomes that they suffered from excited delirium, or the notion that they became so mentally agitated and distressed that they simply died on their own with no one at fault. So what's interesting and surprising about excited delirium is that despite its widespread use among law enforcement, coroners and medical examiners, and forensic pathologists, there's little scientific evidence that the disease exists. It's not recognized in the DSM-5 by the American Psychiatric Association, nor in the ICD-10 by the World Health Organization. And there have been meta-analyses of the scientific literature on excited delirium, and the general conclusion is that there is little evidence that it exists at all. So how has this idea become so popular within policing and among some medical professionals when all evidence shows it's not real? So my work right now is trying to tease this out and to show how the emergence and popularity of excited delirium as an explanation for how people die in police custody stems from some of the tragic ways that race and racism come together in law and medicine. So I'm working on a book now that will tell this story and lay out this history in a way that will hopefully encourage medical professionals to be more proactive and not allowing science and medicine to be used as weapons that might obscure social injustice. So my time here with you is short, and I'll end on a positive note. Bringing attention to this issue has led to some positive outcomes. So, for example, California recently passed a law banning the use of excited delirium as a term that can be used by police and health professionals. And several organizations, including the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association, have written position statements against the term. Even more, professional organizations that have been rather strident in supporting excited delirium, such as the American College of Emergency Physicians, have recently started to move away from using the term. Yet, there are still some challenges. Excited delirium is still used by many local police departments and other health officials. But these recent developments in California and elsewhere show how our work as scholars and advocates for health and justice can have a positive impact on our communities. I'm looking forward to continuing this work, and I'm thankful to the Nova Institute for their support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Osagie. It's certainly been a long road to justice in this area, and there's still obviously a lot of ground to cover. But this progress and the work that you're doing to shift that story is so encouraging. So thank you again. Next, we're turning to food justice, specifically ultra-processed foods as a pervasive commercial determinant of ill health. And to introduce this topic, we're really fortunate to have Ashley Gearhardt, a professor of psychology in the clinical sciences at the University of Michigan. And then she will be followed by her colleague and collaborator, LaFata, from Drexel University. And she's going to be talking about how this is a major social justice area.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ashley Gearhardt, and I'm the director of the Food and Addiction Science and Treatment Lab at the University of Michigan. And I'm happy to speak with you today about our research that demonstrates parallels between ultra-processed foods and addictive substances. I think the first thing to keep in mind when considering these parallels is how we traditionally create all addictive substances. They're really not found in nature. Addictive substances are man-made creations that we make by taking something that is naturally occurring, like a tobacco leaf or a coca leaf or some fruit, and we process and refine it and so that it rapidly delivers a high dose of rapidly absorbed reinforcing substance into the system. And that profile really seems to trigger our motivation and reward systems in a way that for some people, they can start to lose control and consume the substance compulsively, even if they want to stop, even if they want to cut down, even if they know that they have a life-threatening health condition. And so when I look at our food supply and how it's changed over the last 1,000 years, but particularly since the late 1970s, what I've seen is that we've gotten technology that's been really good at cheaply and effectively refining out carbohydrates and fats from naturally occurring foods like fruits and nuts and meats, and taking these potent, refined, distilled, rewarding food substances and then combining them into thousands upon thousands of different ultra-processed food products. And these food products deliver a naturally high dose of carbohydrate and fat at a rate that's more rapid than we see in real food, because real food often has fiber and water and protein, and it takes a little while to eat and it takes a little while to digest and absorb. When you take something like a handful of jelly beans relative to a banana, how quickly you can eat that, chew that, absorb it, and how rapidly it hits your gut and then your brain, the sugar in that is much more potent and powerful. And so as we've refined these food-like substances, these ultra-processed foods, to be more and more rewarding, we've also developed them to be more shelf-stable, more novel, to be heavily marketed and to target kids. And all of these approaches really come from the playbook of tobacco. And that really shouldn't be surprising to us, because Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds bought up food companies beginning in the late 1970s and 80s, when the tobacco industry was coming more under threat. The portfolio was diversified by buying up companies like General Mills and Kraft. And there's evidence that has been published that the food-owned tobacco company, the tobacco-owned food companies, were able to come in and apply the playbook they knew about how to sell an addictive substance very effectively by targeting kids and enhancing flavors and targeting communities that were more vulnerable, like racial and ethnic communities that were more stigmatized, and really focusing on them to sell the product. And there's evidence that they took all of those approaches and applied them to their food holdings. So as our food system of now dominated by ultra-processed foods have been shaped by big tobacco, that's really when we've seen this huge uptick in obesity, diet-related disease, and compulsive overeating. And when we look at the hallmarks of addiction, when we look at how do we try and understand whether somebody's a social drinker or really have an addictive relationship with alcohol, we look at behavioral markers like a loss of control over intake, continued use despite negative consequences, intense cravings, feelings of withdrawal like anxiety and agitation and depression when you try and cut down, and tolerance where you need kind of more and more of that substance to get the same fix of reward. When we look at those core hallmarks of addiction, we see all of those showing up across kids, teenagers, adults, older adults, when it comes to their relationship, specifically with these common ultra-processed foods, foods like chocolate and ice cream and French fries. We do not see that sort of hallmarks of addiction showing up with foods like fruits and legumes and veggies and lean meats. That people don't seem to really develop this addictive relationship with foods that our brains evolved to handle. And these ultra-processed foods truly have more in common with a cigarette than they do a food that was created by Mother Nature. And that's been a huge public health crisis for us.
Thank you. We'll go straight to Erica. Welcome, Erica.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share some of the research and expand upon what Ashley has spoken about. Just as a note, Ashley and I collaborated on much of the research she spoke about, so I would be happy to answer any questions that cover the scope of her presentation as well. So I just want to start by kind of defining a little bit more about how we assess ultra-processed food addiction in the literature before I start presenting data that speaks specifically to the social justice implications of this work. So as Ashley was mentioning, the Yale Food Addiction Scale is the primary tool that we use to operationalize this clinical presentation of ultra-processed food addiction. And it assesses the 11 DSM diagnostic criteria for substance use disorders and directly applies those criteria to assess the problematic addictive-like intake of ultra-processed foods. So as Ashley mentioned, some just examples that parallel those diagnostic criteria are continued intake despite consequences, a persistent but unsuccessful desire to cut down on these foods, and very core addiction mechanisms like withdrawal. Just as you could meet criteria for a substance use disorder, an individual meets criteria for ultra-processed food addiction if they endorse 2 or more symptoms of the 11, and also an indication of clinical impairment or distress. So currently, all of this is sussed out by this self-report measure, the Yale Food Addiction Scale. Importantly, 2 systematic reviews have recently come out that collate data across 281 studies and across 36 countries to estimate the point prevalence of ultra-processed food addiction. And when we're looking at samples from across the world and collating that, it's a prevalence of about 14% in adults, which is very similar to alcohol use disorder, which is 14%, and tobacco use disorder, which is 18%. And extremely notably, the rates of ultra-processed food addiction are 12% in children, which obviously there is no parallel to that with substance use disorders. So kind of going into some of the very significant health disparities that have been noted in one of my recent research studies conducted in a nationally representative sample of individuals in the United States with almost 1,000 participants, rates of ultra-processed food addiction by racial and ethnic identification revealed some pretty striking disparities. So the point prevalence among individuals who identified as white was about 12%, and you can see that among individuals who identified as Hispanic, it's almost a third of our participants. And this was not a clinical sample. So this is estimating based on demographically matched individuals what the point prevalence might be in different groups. So this is really striking and concerning. Other findings from that study included that individuals who reported having a lower household income and exhibiting symptoms of ultra-processed food addiction were more likely to have those addictive-like eating behaviors translate into a higher BMI and obesity. And household food insecurity was reported to increase the risk of ultra-processed food addiction by 20 to 56%. So there's some really notable trends here, and it kind of brings up the question of why? Why are we noticing this? I have two kind of key takeaways that I tend to kind of hang the hat on. One is target marketing. Big food companies very directly have targeted people of color when they're marketing ultra-processed foods. So one of the things Ashley was alluding to is that there was a minority marketing plan put into place when Philip Morris, which is the tobacco company, bought Kraft and General Foods in the 1980s. Specifically, what this entailed and continues to entail is that strategies marketing tobacco to persons of color were applied to ultra-processed food marketing, again, starting just when this company bought it up the big food industry. Some examples of this were disproportionately more marketing in media outlets and locations that are frequented by Black and Hispanic individuals, corporate-sponsored community events within these communities, associating specific brands with certain underrepresented groups. So a prominent example that's noted in the literature is Tang, which is a beverage being marketed primarily to Hispanic families and including Black and Latino and Latina celebrities in fast food campaigns. So very specific targeting marketing efforts that are not paralleled when we're looking at communities that are primarily white individuals. The second major issue is that there is this kind of systemic influence on UPF intake, or ultra-processed food intake. Importantly, these foods are cheap and they are calorie dense, which makes them an understandably common choice for people who have lower household incomes or food insecurity. I think one of the most important distinctions about this literature is that it is true that people need to eat to survive, but they don't need to eat ultra-processed foods. This is a very silly analogy when I say it this way, but it's almost like saying we need to drink to survive, but we don't have to drink alcohol. We need water to survive. We need naturally occurring foods to survive, not these industry-created foods that are very correlated with diet-related disease and other conditions. I think it's really important to note that the abundance of these foods in our supply strongly influences food choices and is really leading to addictive responses in both children and adults. This really goes beyond the narrative of willpower and personal responsibility. The rates of obesity have not increased in our society because people are less responsible for their eating choices. It's really directly on a parallel timeline as these foods infiltrating our food environment. Psychoeducation campaigns are also minimally effective. People know what they need to be eating, but are struggling to follow through with those choices. And these foods are highly reinforcing, which motivates their intake among people experiencing stress. So I just want everyone to imagine this as I'm wrapping up. If there were as many cues in our environment for alcohol as there were for ultra-processed foods, including the places we see ultra-processed foods in children's environments, I think there's just an unprecedented harm that is present and something for us to be considering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica and Ashley. The research that you're doing in this area is clearly powerful, and the commercial determinants are key. And we actually have the perfect person to build on that narrative. Ashka Naik, the Director of Research and Policy at Corporate Accountability, who works at the highest levels to challenge the abuses of transnational corporations. So welcome, Ashka.
Thank you so much, Susan, for invitation to this pretty stellar forum. So my message today cuts across a few themes already presented on. And as you just mentioned, complements what the previous speakers just shared. Childhood obesity and food industries accountability, and why this is a matter of justice. But let me just kind of take a step back and begin by saying that I do not know of a social justice leader, may it be Mandela, Gandhi, or women leaders from social movements from La Via Campesina or Chipko movements in the Himalayas, who have not put the health and well-being of future generations at the center of their life's work. Nor has there been an indigenous or ancient society that has not prioritized how children can thrive and flourish as generations pass by. And it was successful. And because of that, we are here today. However, in the modern mechanistic organization of socioeconomic hegemonies, we have done a massive disservice to this foundational principle our ancestors once embraced. For example, a recent poll by Wall Street Journal and the University of Chicago has found that a large majority, nearly 80% of Americans believe that their children's lives will be worse off than theirs. According to UNICEF, 180 million children living in 37 countries are more likely to live in extreme poverty, be out of school, or be killed by violent death than children living in those exact countries 20 years ago. According to the FAO, a child dies every 10 seconds from malnutrition. So while conflicts, and we can't not mention the plight of the children of Gaza today, economic shocks and extreme weather conditions are drastically exacerbating world hunger. There is an enormous burden of non-communicable diseases now exhausting children and youth across the world, as Erica and the previous speaker shared. Nearly 40 million preschool children under the age of 5 are found to be overweight or obese, a 60% increase just since 1990. And of these 40 million, 35 million live in the global south. The worldwide prevalence of obesity has nearly tripled in the past 3 decades, disproportionately affecting children and youth from socioeconomically excluded populations. Now, all this did not happen in vacuum. Obesity and other entities did not increase because humans suddenly started selecting unhealthy foods, or they were not smart enough to fathom ill effects of these products. Of course, the industry, the likes of Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Nestle, McDonald's, their supply chain actors, fueling this public health crisis and extreme destruction of agroecological biodiversity, would love for us to put the blame on individuals. But in fact, there is a long history of colonization, corporatization, co-optation of local indigenous food systems by a very few global North-centric elite business interests that have now displaced or fully destroyed local vibrant food cultures with their industrial commodities sold as foods, resulting in this explosion of diseases. As the previous speakers mentioned, there are deep racial dimensions to this. And just to add to what Erica shared, a recent report by the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Health has found that 19 big US food corporations allocated upwards of $1 billion of their ad budgets to Black and Hispanic consumers in 2021, pushing hyper-palatable, high-calorie, low-nutrition products like candies and fast foods. So that kind of makes sense, right? Why we see these disparate numbers in the findings of the research that was shared. On the other hand, there are other forces at play, evidence-based science that added sugars cause NCDs, that certain chemicals are nefarious if used as food additives, and so on, is systematically challenged by industry-backed junk science, specifically designed to deny, delay, distract, and deflect the blame away from their products. Food industry argues that their food is cheap and accessible, and thus must be considered essential service. In fact, we saw that across countries in the COVID-19 pandemic, food industries lobbying governments Well, these products are cheap because industry's political influence has ensured that billions of dollars in government subsidies are directed to commodity crops like soya, like sugarcane sugarcane and corn, the primary ingredients of many of these ultra-processed foods. And so then the real cost of these products is borne by public health systems and by our children and youth as burden of diet-related diseases. And now, big pharma, specifically the weight loss drug companies, are leveraging this crisis of childhood obesity for profit by funding institutions like the American Academy of Pediatrics, which then goes on to publish guidelines that recommend that weight loss drugs and such pharmacological solutions can be used for school-age children. You know, the conflict of interest embedded here are just remarkable and mostly opaque. You know, so what can be done? Well, actually a lot, and a lot is being done. We and innumerable community and civil society organizations across the world are working closely with frontline communities, policymakers, multilateral and government institutions to cultivate solutions for requisite kind of transformational change. And to seriously address this public health catastrophe, you know, we have been and must continue to demand that public resources are put behind advancing strong, conflict-free science, that we immediately safeguard nutrition and public policies from influence of the industry, and we must embrace strong regulatory infrastructure to ensure that industry becomes accountable to the people and that the well-being of future generation is not left at the feet of the industry's caprices and corruption. And this is precisely why childhood obesity is an urgent ethical and a political issue, an issue of democracy, and an issue of justice. Thank you,
Thank
Susan.
you so much. Perfect. I was just about to say we're at 6 minutes. It's really wonderful, Ashka, and thank you for bringing this back to the importance also of our children's health for the health of our future. And it's really inspiring to know your efforts and others towards addressing policy and practice, and we're already looking forward to collaborating with you in this space. Now, our next speaker, Leslie Soble, has been working to bring food justice to the criminal justice system, and I know that many of you have been looking forward to hearing from her, but she just sent me a message that she's too unwell to join us today. So we wish her a speedy recovery, and we're going to go to our first discussion panel a bit earlier because of that. But as we do that, I might just ask Alan to step in and just tell us a little bit about, he's been following Leslie's work, a little bit about the work that she has been doing, because it follows on beautifully from our previous narratives. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to just jump in real quick. For those that don't know me, I'm Alan Logan. I'm a fellow at NOVA, and I absolutely love this panel. One after another after another. Leslie's work is so powerful because she has been researching the vulnerable of the vulnerable, the marginalized of the marginalized, which is incarcerated persons. And when you talk about food injustice, it's plain to see. It's, as she said in her recent expose, it's a form of hidden punishment. And ultra-processed foods prevail. And of course, all of the same tactics that Ashka just outlined, which is provide products that have certain nutrients and certain calories, which really, many of them are ultra-processed foods, Erica. And those same addictions take place because there is anecdotal research showing that those addictive properties are observed in incarcerated persons dating back to Stephen Schoenfelder's work in the 1980s. But I'm going to put in some links on the side about her work at Impact Justice. And I guess the most important thing I'd like to say, just to keep this tight for time, is that her work is creating solutions. So we see the state of Maine in cooperation with a group called Brigade. These are chefs that have been going into schools to transform school-based nutrition. And so they're doing this program in the Maine prison systems to try to transform the foods. They'll try to cut down as much as possible on ultra-processed foods while also providing a cost-effective solution. It's worth pointing out, just to demonstrate how disgraceful this situation is, that there's one state in the United States that their total daily expenditure, this is not one meal, daily expenditure on food is $1.02 per day. What are you going to get for $1.02 per day? And I think that just sort of speaks, on average, it's $3 across the United States per day. So I think we can kind of see what the problem is here. I'm going to put the links in there, and I really look forward to, in one of our campfires at NOVA, really zeroing in on this topic from a justice perspective, because I think there's a lot of learning to be had there. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks so much, Alan. We've had a really wonderful session so far. We began with the wonderful, expansive, beautiful new narrative of the Earth Charter, and thank you, Mirian, for sharing that. And then we've progressed to some of the, sort of dived into some of the more specific challenges, but also bright spots in those areas. So I invite anyone who would like to add to the conversation at this point. George is waving his hand in traditional style, so go.
Yes. So we know from the tobacco literature that the most effective strategies have involved environmental restrictions and cost, increasing the cost of smoking. I'm wondering if some of the speakers could address that with respect to some of these issues around ultra-processed food, for example. We haven't been terribly successful in soda taxes, I know, but what's the state of the art there?
Ashka, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I mean, it's a really difficult response, and I'll acknowledge that, because the strategic collusion between industry actors that we feel are actually in competition, but are really joining forces to build this immense political power to create socio-political system where, you know, challenging their business practices and products becomes a very lengthy process. Not to say it cannot be done. So the way we have been organizing our campaigns and have been very instrumental in actually the tobacco work, which brought us to the FCTC, which is the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and Article 5.3 specifically, which safeguards that entire policy process from tobacco industry. So there are victories won, but the two sort of grand strategy that we have been advancing, the first one being direct corporate targeting, building pressure on corporations, on corporate actors by organizing masses of people across the world. And then the second grand strategy is working with and for public institutions, you know, collaborating with policymakers to really lock in change in form of rules and regulations and policies. So, you know, I'll stop there. There are specific examples I could give, but you're right. So the taxes have been successful. I mean, there are, unfortunately, United States is not the best example for success, but countries in Latin America have been making real steps toward, you know, safeguarding public health from food industry actors. And in fact, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Chile, these are some of the examples where, you know, we are now beginning to see peer-reviewed research coming out that underscores the impact of front package labeling of certain kind, and, you know, soda taxes, and just kind of regulations around marketing campaigns and digital marketing specifically. So, but I'm sure Erica also has things to add.
Okay, I was just going to say very, very briefly, one of the most effective approaches in the tobacco industry as well is like the Truth Campaign, which exposes the industry practices and kind of promotes some of that deception and their marketing, their formulation of these products. And I would be really curious about the efficacy of a program that's kind of targeting the food industry, revealing some of these facts that I've shared today.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it really is about shifting public perception and acceptability and rejecting actively these things, but that requires awareness, as you say. Are there any additional comments before we move on to our next panel speakers? Good. Well, I want to firstly just thank all of the speakers that have spoken so far. It really, really it is wonderful. And as we move on to the next part of our panel, the key theme of this meeting is, as we've already been talking about, changing the story, which is why NOVA has invested in a media fellowship program to tell us more about that vision behind the vision behind that, rather. I'm really thrilled to invite Judd. She's an Emmy award-winning journalist who has reported for ABC News, NPR, PBS, NewsHour, and many, many others. So over to you, Jackie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, so much. And it's been so interesting to be listening to everything that's been said in the hour prior. I appreciate being a part of this group. As Susan said, I spent most of my career as a journalist, and then as a second act, moved into health policy communications. And then I had this great opportunity to merge those two tracks by being part of NOVA's Media Advisory Council, which has, as Susan suggested, helped select our very first class of media fellows, whom you will all meet in just a moment. We, meaning the committee and Brian and Susan, we set out to find journalists focused on health issues facing individuals, communities, the planet at large. As the Bermans always remind us, these are all interconnected. And importantly, we wanted journalists who could effectively focus on reporting on emerging and proven solutions to some of these issues. I have to say that I feel like NOVA bravely stepped into this journalism space at a time when so many journalism organizations are contracting and new funding models are needed. And here we have one. It also came at a time when I so believe that clarity and honesty need to be there in the journalism field to silence misinformation, disinformation, which happens across the board, including in the spaces in which all of you work. And in the journalism community, there is clearly a hunger for the kind of opportunity which NOVA has offered. We received dozens of applications. It was a tough process to get it down to 3. It was tough because there were so many terrific ideas and so many terrific reporters. And so it is now my true pleasure to introduce you to the 3 who survived this sometimes laborious process, who are exceptional journalists. They're going to fill you in on their projects: Kate Morgan, Virginia Gewin, and Lela Nargi. Lela, I want to turn it over to you to get the conversation going. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Jackie. It's nice to see you all here and to be a part of this conversation. A lot of my work focuses on food and agricultural systems, and some of the topics that were discussed already today by some other panelists are very familiar to me, especially apropos of the projects that I'm working on now as a media fellow, having to do with water insecurity, which Carlos spoke of earlier. My focus is on the United States, which has been sort of an overlooked contingency when it comes to folks who are experiencing water poverty and water insecurity, but all that's changing, obviously, with climate change, and as various kinds of contamination are seeping into people's wells, aquifers are being pumped dry. I don't need to tell all of you probably about many of the depressing sort of outcomes that are happening now. Also, ultra high processed foods, you know, as 2 panelists pointed out, affecting disproportionately low-income communities who I report on all the time. Interestingly, that was the jumping off point for the stories that I proposed as a media fellow to NOVA. There is research coming out of the university, out of Northwestern University and some others, that shows a very strong correlation between food insecurity and water insecurity, and that's what I'm writing about. I'm in fact just recently back from a week in the Central Valley of California, in the San Joaquin Valley specifically, which is at the southern part of the breadbasket of the United States. I think it's something like 40% of our food is grown there. And I was speaking to farm workers who live in really pretty desperate situations, really rundown trailers, really poor quality everything, including poor access to clean water. So I was there speaking to farm workers about what possible solutions there were to increasing their access to clean water. It turns out, there's been a huge push to get farm workers better access to water in the field because they become so incredibly dehydrated, especially as temperatures are rising. California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, I believe, are the 4 states that have legislation about this. Even so, speaking to farm workers, it became really clear that access to water, even in the field where it was legally mandated, was not happening. They're not allowed to bring their own water bottles for fear that they'll steal the produce that they're harvesting. The water that is supplied by large farm companies is often warm, smells bad, tastes bad. Folks don't want to drink it, in addition to a whole panoply of other problems. Then they go home and they don't have any water. They have water that's contaminated with manganese or lead or arsenic. And a lot of them are paying for, all of them are paying for water. They pay for water service in California. And in addition to a $100 water bill, they're also having to buy bottled water. So they're getting hugely walloped. And as I've written about before, poverty is really the root cause of these issues. And so for folks who are on SNAP, who can spend some of their SNAP benefits on water, that means that they have less money left over for food. So it just becomes this sort of downward spiral of badness for a lot of these populations. California is kind of an interesting case. They have a farm worker community that tends to be a lot less migratory than in some other states, because they have almost year-round production there. So folks are staying, even folks who are undocumented, which offers this enormous opportunity to build good quality housing. And there are some NGOs on the ground there that are doing just that, forming partnerships with places I didn't even know existed before, like Engineers Without Borders, new to me, but they're figuring out how to leverage federal and state funding to build better water infrastructure. It's really complicated. And also build better housing. So that's just a snippet. That's the first story that will be coming out for related to my fellowship. It'll be in The Guardian. It's been filed, and I'm excited to see it come out and present it all to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lela. I'll jump in and just direct us to Kate Morgan, who's going to talk about challenges and hope in communities in Appalachia.
I am. It's true. So I'm Kate Morgan. I am here in rural Pennsylvania, in the Appalachian foothills, and the kind of crux of my reporting prior to now, but certainly over the next year, is all about Appalachia. There's, I think I wrote in my application that there's no place so impacted by the social determinants of health, plagued by poverty, or ecologically wrung out in the name of progress as Appalachia. But it's also a remarkably resilient place. It's a place that is crucially important for biodiversity conservation and as a climate refuge. Right up there with the Serengeti and the Amazon rainforest. Truly, it is ecologically that important a place. And there's a lot of resilience in the communities there as well. And so for me, it was kind of the perfect place to focus this year of solutions journalism and solutions reporting, because the problems are many and massive, but the solutions are also there. And in a lot of cases, the solutions come in the form of grassroots organizing and movements and people who actually live in these communities, who know what these communities need. They don't intend to leave. In a lot of cases, it's because they can't. But also kind of right up there with they can't afford to leave. They don't want to leave. They want to fix the place where they are. There's a word in Appalachian culture, not just Appalachia, it's rural culture in general, but they use it a lot in Appalachia. And people will talk about the home place, and it's one word. So the home place is physically a piece of property that in many cases a family has owned for generations and generations. But it's also way more meaningful than that, because there are a lot of families that don't actually live on the home place for one reason or another. It might be too close to a creek that now floods in a way that, prevents livability or any number of reasons. But the home place is still like an important aspect of who these people are. And so I don't know, that just kind of speaks to the like heart of the stories that I'm pursuing. And so I've got 2 that'll publish before the end of the year. So one also with The Guardian, I've got, final edits submitted, and I'm expecting to see that live in the next week or 2. And that's a story about flooding. There's a saying in Appalachia, sometimes when you say goodbye to an old timer, or you say, I'll see you later, or I'll see you again, they'll say, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise. And so flooding has been just a way of life in Appalachia forever. There are so many creeks and rivers and streams and tributaries, and just, the way that water flows in the mountains. Creeks rise. Sometimes it takes out roads, takes out bridges. Sometimes you wouldn't see your neighbor for, weeks to months. And that's where that saying comes from. But things are changing. Things have changed really considerably. Most of us are probably familiar with the really devastating flooding that happened in eastern Kentucky last summer that killed 40 people and just decimated a number of communities. So that flooding there are some really clear ties being made both by researchers at the University of Kentucky and by the people who live in some of these, now former towns, that a lot of the most devastating floods happened in places where places that are below unreclaimed or poorly reclaimed strip mines. Maybe this seems obvious, but essentially, mining has changed the hydrology of this region in a way that is incredibly dangerous for the communities that are there, and getting more dangerous because climate change is drastically increasing annual precipitation in the Appalachians. So anyway, the story that I'm writing for The Guardian is about these communities working not only to hold the coal companies responsible for this risk and to stand up and say, I think there's a quote in that story that's like, the coal companies up until now have been operating under the belief that if us dumb hillbillies want to live below the strip mine, then that's a risk we're going to have to take. Essentially, the communities are standing up and saying, like, no, we were here first. But also, in terms of solutions, we can fix the hydrology. We can come in, and clean up what the coal companies have left behind. So that's organizations that are headquartered in this region, going in with heavy equipment, tearing up that compacted ground, getting rid of those non-native grasses and sedges, and planting trees. None of it's fast. Forests grow slow, but the answers are there. I have another great story coming out that I'm really excited about. That one's for Vox. It's about acid mine drainage. If you're not familiar with acid mine drainage, basically the impact of coal doesn't end when the coal comes out of the ground. That's kind of just the beginning. What's left behind is some really toxic byproducts that leach into soil, leach into waterways, and kill pretty much everything they touch. So this isn't just a problem with strip mines. It's also a problem with underground mines, especially old underground mines, abandoned underground mines. In Eastern Ohio, this is probably one of the most extreme instances of acid mine drainage anywhere. But it's a place called the Sunday Creek. It's a tributary of the Hocking River. It's like 35 miles from the West Virginia border. I was just there a few weeks ago, and it's almost, even though it's like my job to do this, it's almost hard to put into words how unriverine this place is. A place that so obviously should be teeming with life is just dead. I mean, truly dead. The water is like this sickly acid ochre color. It is full of rust buildup. I mean, it's literally rust. It's iron oxide. And the water's so acidic that truly nothing can survive. But there's a plan, because there's always a plan. So locals have figured out a way to distill that pollution into pigment. The United States uses like 300 million tons of iron oxide every year as paint and tints for like construction materials and makeup and any number of other things. And we buy most of it from overseas. A lot of it's shipped in from China. Now we don't have to. We can get it from Appalachian streams. So that's a story for Vox. It should be out before the end of the week. So that's my update. Those are just the first in a slew of stories that I'm going to do this year. So far, so good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Kate. And it's just so exciting to hear that there are so many opportunities emerging from these challenges and so much resilience in these communities that face so many challenges. So now we're going to hear about air pollution and emerging pollutants from Virginia Gewin. Thank you, Virginia. Unless you want to talk about Appalachia.
Nope, I'll leave that to Kate. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. So my project is really building on a couple of years of reporting that I've been doing about dust in the West. And, that naturally just has gotten me interested in air quality and public health. And so I'm doing a whole series of stories that really look at this nexus between environmental degradation, air quality, public health, and with a specific aim to looking at emerging contaminants of concern. So things like mega wildfires, toxic algal blooms, and microplastics. So I've been, really trying to, I did a lot of reporting on the Salton Sea and the Great Salt Lake in the last couple of years. And so looking at this kind of worldwide problem of these shrinking terminal lakes that are full of pesticides and metals and all kinds of good stuff, and they're shrinking, and the playa dust is then airborne or very emissive. And so really, I've been asked to help co-chair a panel discussion at the European Geosciences Union in April in Vienna. And so I'm reaching out to scientists all over the world who have been studying, everything from Lake Urmia in Iran to the Aral Sea to Lake Chad to all of these different, this is just a global phenomenon, a global problem in the face of climate change. And so what are we going to do with better understanding and kind of coalescing all of this knowledge gained from all of these different perspectives? So I've been having to put a lot of emphasis and focus on that right now because we're trying to assemble this panel for an April meeting, and then I'll be able to interview people and be on site there and hopefully do some more reporting overseas. So that's one aspect of what I've been working on. And then also really looking at, basically all the ways that we're breathing our environmental mismanagement. So I'm going to be going to a couple of eutrophied lakes that have nearly constant toxic algal blooms. And there's a whole cadre of scientists that I've found that are doing some of the first investigations of how much of the toxins can be aerosolized and what is the impact of that. And so there's a lake in Ohio that has a nearly constant algal bloom that I'm going to be traveling to also in April and talking to people there. And then I know of some work that's happening at the Salton Sea that's going to be coming out soon, that's going to be kind of looking at the same phenomenon. And so really trying to understand what this, I would say, of all of the things I'm looking at, is probably the most kind of cutting edge or new emerging contaminant of concern that people are really just starting to grapple with and understand. And then lastly, just, looking at microplastics, looking at, how much of it is airborne, how much is getting ingested, and looking at different communities that are grappling with this issue. So like Houston, I'm off to Houston in January, and there's a whole plastics conference. And I've also built in some time to talk to other groups that are looking at just broader impacts of air pollution in the Houston area from industry, and just how all of these interacting factors are causing a lot of unnecessary mortality in the region. And lastly, a big focus, I think, from all of us is focusing on the marginalized communities. And so there's been a lot of work that's come out recently about Indigenous populations and how air quality in counties that have higher numbers of Indigenous populations have worse air quality. And so I am reaching out, and there's several scientists that have done a lot of work in the last couple of years specifically on this. And I'm reaching out to tribal air quality specialists and really trying to make sure that the issues that they're facing are being raised and given the attention that they need. So that's kind of where my efforts are going. And it's just like a kid in a candy store. I just get to do all of the cool interviews that I want to do all day long. And I'm really, really appreciative.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you all. I think you can see from the chat that people are really enthusiastic about having this opportunity to work with journalists, and I think there's probably a number of other opportunities that for people that are here that are working in your space that may be able to connect and amplify what you're doing, and vice versa. So this is really exciting, and I think it exemplifies what Nova wants to do in terms of really changing the story. And we've got experts doing that. Now, finally, we actually want to hear the voices of youth in the community. And we're going to hear that right now, a wonderful initiative founded by veteran journalist and social change agent, Jane O'Donnell, who founded the Youthcaster Media Group. And we thought we would begin with a 5-minute compilation of the TikTok videos that these wonderful youth are doing to really promote some of these ideas to their community and give you an idea of their work. And then we will hear from one of the wonderful youth interns, Aabrielle Spear. So let's go with the TikTok video first, and then we'll hear from Aabrielle.
There are many interventions to help someone with a physical problem, but what about a mental one? America is in the throes of a mental health crisis. According to hopkinsmedicine.org, 1 in 4 Americans have a diagnosable mental health condition in a given year. That's tens of millions of people, kids and adults, who often have trouble getting the help they need. There's a growing movement that can fill this gap. Mental health first aid teaches people how to identify a mental health or substance use crisis. This training gives everyday people, even teens, the tools to assist when someone near them is having a rough time. The goal is to make this training as commonplace as first aid and CPR. Mental health first aid uses the acronym ALGIE. A is assess for risk of harm or suicide. L is to listen non-judgmentally. G, give information and reassurance. E, encourage professional help if needed. And the last E, encourage self-help. You could be the person that saves someone in crisis. You can make a difference in so many lives. Thank you. Bye.
First step of getting better in anything is admitting that you need help or that you need to fix something so that you're able to grow. To find healthy coping skills. So for example, after a while, I found journaling as a healthy coping skill. Listening to music, working out, or doing something physical also helps alleviate those thoughts because you're actually doing something with your body and focusing on something other than what's going on in your mind. Mindfulness activities, but overall just really healthy coping skills, and also finding a really good support system or support group to help you with whatever you're going through. Because honestly, if I didn't have my mom or just people that cared enough about me to help me with whatever I was going through, I feel like I would have struggled with more than I did before.
In my neighborhood, that was nothing cool to talk about. You never talked about your mental problems or something that you're going through. It's all right. Maybe it's all right to come to this place. You know, maybe it's all right. Maybe this is something cool. I can get some help and I can express that to somebody. To have a place to come, like the McClendon Center, that I can always call back on and always been there for me. Even when I'm incarcerated, they checking up on me in the cell like, hey, are you okay? You know, make sure you contact us when when you get back out. Like, it makes a person feel like, yo, it's worth it. Yo, I need that. Like, that's what I need. That's what I'm missing.
My name is Martez Tolbert, but please call me Tez. I'm the National Director of Client and Community Engagement here at the Fund. So all of the stuff that I have done or have completed or I went through, I got to give it away. My mentors call it to keep what I have, I got to give it away. He always teaches me that. It's like everything you learn says you sponge it all up, but to keep it, you got to constantly give it away. Fire hose it to people. So I'm like, wow. So that's kind of me. I just be fire hosing people all types of information. I'm just a bottleneck of information and connectivity and resources. And if that's what God intended me to go through hell so I could be on this other side, to rise from the ashes, to be a vessel for my folks in our community, because we definitely need it. That's what I'm here to do, and I'm energized and I'm here for it.
This is Kayla Johnson with Youthcast Media Group, here today with Victoria Waltz Mosby, a mental health advocate and suicide survivor. What has helped you survive and thrive after your suicide attempt during college?
I'd say the main thing that's helped me, which hasn't been easy, but it's been getting more comfortable with actually being open with people that are close to me about what's really going on. For most of my childhood and life up to that point, I have been very used to masking and bottling up my feeling. So that's probably been the biggest thing, is really being okay with being vulnerable around the people that I trust, and being willing to talk about what I'm actually feeling has definitely helped.
You can't use vitriol or denigrate an addict into recovery. There is nothing you're going to say to them that is worse than what they're already telling themselves in their head. It would be inhumane to say the kind of things that I was saying to myself in my head, and not many people are going to be, can be outwardly that inhumane to others. So the only way to ever reach someone that has an addiction problem is with love.
Well, I think you can appreciate just how touching, how powerful those videos are, and we really find this so inspiring. And we have Aabrielle here, who was featured on one of those beautiful videos. Aabrielle, welcome. We're really excited to hear from you and more about Youthcaster. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay. So again, I'm Aabrielle. I'm currently a freshman at Morgan State University. I'm majoring in psychology, and Youthcast Media, basically, we work with high school students in training them in writing, reporting, and broadcasting different issues and highlighting solutions to things like poverty, health, mental health, and social disparities. And I think this is all really important and something that we all should talk about, because like older generations say, the younger generations are going to be the ones who carry the torch and lead us to the future. And in order for us to do this effectively and efficiently, I think it's really important for us to be able to educate ourselves as the younger generation, so that we are able to educate the general public. As the overall video was talking about, mental health is a huge one, and I am personally a mental health advocate. And one of the things that I do think we all need to get better in learning is mental health. And to dive deeper into that, like one issue that we could all learn more about is the justice system, I guess you could say. Definitely, for example, when police are called to a scene, say somebody commits a crime, instead of that police officer saying, hey, this was an act of violence, just doing it just to be violent. Instead, the police officer with proper training can really realize that, hey, this might be a manic episode of someone that has BPD, or this is somebody who has schizophrenia and has a mental breakdown. So instead of really just applying violent force from the police officer, with the proper training and help, the police officer can, really realize and notice the signs before it's too late. And with this, I believe that if this were to happen, the police officers getting better training, there will be a lot less people in the prison systems. And so with this Youthcast Media Group, our job is to create TikTok videos, write articles, do interviews on mental health, and really pushing out this information so that everybody is notified and everybody is educated. So, yeah.
Thank you, Aabrielle. It's really inspiring, and I was just so personally touched by watching those short videos. It's amazing what you can communicate in 60 seconds in those videos, and that message of the only way that you can really reach people is love really resonated. So thank you, and thank Jane, and thank everybody in your community for the wonderful work that you're doing. And I think there's been some links in the chat for people, and we will, if not, we'll put them on the hub so that people can find more about you. So now we are going to move to some more opportunities for discussion and questions and answers. So if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, just put up your hand.
I just want to say it was a great session, and it was really bookended, with Osagie talking about, the end of his end with these false false diagnoses that are then leading to death. And then at the other end, there's Aabrielle talking about that need to understand what this person might be going through. And I think the police officer more in a role of a community worker, and not just somebody who's just there about that. Justice is not just in restraining people; it's in understanding. So I loved the way that worked out, and I love the way that in the different speakers, the different things have come through about good communication, trust, love. So thanks, great session, great speakers.
Thank you very much, Sue. Would anyone else like to add to this? Aabrielle, I'm curious to know, how do you recruit people for the work that you're doing? Are you targeting particular schools, or what is the process there?
So I know that we do go to under-resourced communities that are majority Black and Brown, and definitely we do workshops that talk about, again, the different issues. We do workshops on the different TikToks that we can do. You saw the young man that was talking about the mental health. I know that one of the projects that we're working on now is about distracted driving. I've worked on those. I know that there's some other TikToks that some of our other interns have worked on, as well as the different high school students. But definitely we do go to these high schools and we offer workshops, and I guess we offer them topics, and they pick with these topics, they do their research, and we show them how to write things, report on them, do the TikToks, of course, the social posts with Canva and whatnot, and then we push these things out so that people can consume them.
I've got a quick question. I just was curious with Erica, where is this heading to? So we've got this incredible, background research in place. You've got a validated instrument that you've worked hard on, that can be utilized more broadly, I would argue. I think it's still, its application remains limited, even though you've got good research to back it up. So where do you think this is going to head to vis-a-vis changing policy, early life interventions that are going to help prevent this ultra-processed food addiction?
Yeah, I'll try to answer as concisely as possible. I think particularly with my line of research, and from my perspective, the most glaring gap in the science so far is that we have not been able to yet identify the specific agent within ultra-processed foods that we can deem addictive. So with alcohol, it's ethanol. With cigarettes, it's nicotine. So we've been able to do that. And I think the criticisms of this construct and the acceptability of it moving forward are limited by our inability to pinpoint that ingredient in these foods. So my program of research is systematically looking at that right now, with an NIH funded grant. So that's, it's a multi-year project, but it's something that I'm personally pursuing. From a bigger picture, I feel like once we are able to more definitively point to what about these foods is addictive, that can then be a basis for informing policy change, for having more ground to stand on. And of course, like more evidence for the validity of this clinical phenotype will continue to validate individual struggles to help, ideally in the future, like have insurance cover this condition and receive, appropriate evidence-based treatments that just don't exist right now. So there's much work to be done for sure.
There's definitely much work to be done. I sort of see it as there's a subclinical variant. So in any type of, look at a DSM-4 diagnosis, right? There's always this subsyndromal or subclinical variant. And I would argue that there's probably many, many more people that would sit just underneath, let's say, a diagnostic criteria that might be established. And then, of course, there's the conundrum. I think the working hypothesis is that there's unlikely to be one specific ingredient that's going to be the smoking gun of ultra-processed foods. I just feel like there needs to be collaborative work that utilizes your work so that we can work through different channels in parallel at the same time while you're doing your work. I keep pairing it with what Ashka was talking about. I just see the common ground between both you, working in parallel yet intersecting as well.
Yep, totally. We already have a plan to connect in the coming weeks after meeting from this session.
That's what this is all about. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughtful question.
That is what it's all about. And I was also thinking about how the issues of ultra-processed food and the awareness, particularly in youth, could be, and mental health, the effects that ultra-processed foods are having on mental health could be something that the Youthcaster group, for example, or our media fellows could help join that conversation in order to have a really powerful, multi-layered communication strategy to really shift public awareness on that. Are there any other comments? Very welcome. If not, are we ready to wrap? We might be. I'll just give you one more chance. And we do invite you to also continue conversations after the meeting across at the hub. But as the end of this session is approaching, and I don't see any more hands up, just checking. Nope. I really want to thank all of our speakers for their contribution to this meeting and the important work to change the story in promoting justice in so many sectors. And it's really clear from our discussions, especially as how Mirian set that bigger picture of how these things are all connected and all depend on shifting underlying value systems, which is certainly where we're going to continue to take the narrative of this meeting as we go through. I also just want to remind you again to view the wonderful and diverse abstract video presentations on our event page. And again, to please visit the Nova Hub if you want to add to this conversation there. So thank you all once again for being with us and to contributing to these shifting narratives. We have another amazing lineup tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you all until then. Okay, so we'll close out now. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.